and welcome to Connect MKE. I'm your host, Denise Calloway. Thanks for being with us this morning. November is Native American Heritage Month. It gives us the opportunity to learn more about the Native nations on whose land we all live and whose cultures continue to influence the way we live today. One place helping to preserve and share the culture of Wisconsin's first people is the Milwaukee Public Museum. Joining us is Stephen Petrie, Milwaukee Public Museum Informal Education Coordinator, and James Flores, enrolled member of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin and Tribal Liaison of the Milwaukee Public Museum. Thank you both so much for being with us here today.
Thanks for having me. Be here.
Curators at the museum gather materials to tell the story of Wisconsin's Native nations. James, what efforts are in place to make sure the stories that are told are authentic to the tribes?
Yes, this is a great question. Part of my role here is connecting MPM staff with tribal representatives to ensure that the stories are being told authentically and appropriately. This is a real big shift among museums. I think just not at the Milwaukee Public Museum, but this change in having the story told from an anthropologist or archaeologist is now changing, and it's really in its infancy. I think it started in the 90s, I would say, and one of the great examples of this is the Powell diorama exhibit in tribute to survival. This was a true collaboration with tribal members and how these stories are being told. And I think it's an important moment to note. And moving forward with the exhibits that we're working on currently, I think the exhibits are taking it a step further. We're not coming up with the ideas for the exhibit. Tribal members, our tribal partners, the stories they want told in museums are the ones that we are developing into the exhibits.
So the history is really coming from the people who find that it is part of their story, the story of their nations, as opposed to an interpretation from someone whose ancestors were not there and who may not have that same point of view about that history.
Yes, exactly. Anthropologists, archaeologists have told our stories in museums for quite a while now. And I think it's definitely a shift where we're not able to tell our own story.
You mentioned the exhibit that is the powwow exhibit. For people who haven't seen it and who may not know the story behind it, what really makes that exhibit so unique?
Well, again, this is starting off in the shift of how exhibits on Native Americans have changed. And it marks this collaboration of museum professionals and tribal members in the development of these exhibits. This exhibit debuted in 1993. There was 37 models in this exhibit, and community members actually volunteered to have cast and molds of a face taken for figures in the exhibit, and it depicts a modern powwow, and is one of the visitor favorites here at the Milwaukee Public Museum.
So again, really, this is not someone's depiction. It is actual folks, actual lives, celebrating their culture, particularly as it relates to powwows.
Yes, that's correct. And even down to the clothing, the attire that the figures are wearing, a lot of the regalia was made either by the model, the model's family members, or by community members, and then donated to the museum.
There's so much rich history in Wisconsin's Native nations, and I think one of the things that I'm sure some people may be surprised to know is that there's not one monolithic tribe. There are a number of nations that make up Wisconsin's Native culture.
Yes, that's a great point. And I think specifically regarding Wisconsin, we're one of the most diverse states in regards to tribal representation east of the Mississippi. And we have many different nations here with their own languages, their own customs, their own practices. And I think at the museum, it's a great way of highlighting that distinction among all of these tribal nations. And as you walk through the exhibits, you can see different exhibits on the different nations that call Wisconsin home.
What are some of the different things that people might see or notice when it comes to the stories that are told there at the museum about different nations?
That's a great question. The stories the exhibits that are being told the exhibits on Native Americans, on the different tribal nations here in Wisconsin range in topic. However, there are some stories that overlap with, such as the Dawes Allotment Act. It could be about the Indian Reorganization Act. However, we do have specific exhibits from a tribal perspective, such as spearfishing, which discuss the Ojibwe fight for practicing the treaty rights. And there's many more to go in detail. But again, I think coming to the museum would be the perfect opportunity to learn more.
Do the exhibits also tell not only the stories of the past, but also the present and the future of Wisconsin's Native nations?
Yes, and I think that's very important as well, that we have a balanced representation of, yes, we are conveying to the visitor a sense of history, but also making sure that we are presenting Native American culture as a living, vibrant culture today, and just not a people of the past.
Right. What are some of the
That is
things?
some of the exhibits. The contemporary powwow exhibit. We have exhibits regarding how lacrosse is being played, and it's continued to be played today among different tribal nations in Wisconsin.
So is that one of the things that people learn when they go to the museum and see these exhibits, that there may be some things like lacrosse where people may not understand how the traditions and cultures of Native life have really been adopted by dominant cultures, and people may not understand that this is where this particular in the case of lacrosse, sport started, that it started with Wisconsin's Native nations.
Yes, lacrosse is an indigenous game played throughout the Great Lakes and beyond, and each tribe, each story has a cultural connection to the game, and has a different story associated with the game. But again, as you mentioned, this game started its origin as an indigenous game that's now played across the world. And I think that, again, is important to highlight some of our contributions that we've made. I mean, it ranges from sports to food to science, traditional ecological knowledge, our practices on sustainable forestry, and the list goes on.
There are some special visitor engagement opportunities this month that really exist to help us see better that connection between Native culture and some of the things that we may know or take for granted.
So throughout this month, we're highlighting 3 specific engagements. We're focusing on Manoomin, wild rice. We're focusing on birch bark and its many uses by indigenous communities, most specifically related to canoes. And then we're also focusing on white corn of the Oneida people. So these engagements are a way for bringing some pieces from our collection, some pieces that are more recent than our collection, but bringing them into conversation with visitors on the floor. So all of them have something that people can resonate with tactily, but importantly, also all of these engagements also do that work of not just talking about historical, the historical past, not just talking about the past of indigenous communities, but also carrying that story through to the present. Now, they do have an element of that past because that's still an important story to tell, but they're all very clear about the fact that what we're talking about is not something that's relegated to the past. It's not something that's relegated to behind glass or behind a barrier. These are practices of indigenous communities throughout the state and beyond.
And if we can talk about one of them in particular, wild rice. Wild rice plays such an important role in Native culture, but there are also now efforts underway to make sure that wild rice continues to be grown so Native people can still harvest it.
Yep. So we talk about that a little bit in the engagements, one of the focuses, and it's one of the changes in how our museum has traditionally talked about it. If you come to the Milwaukee Public Museum today, we do have a diorama depicting a wild rice harvest, but that's set in the past. So our engagement tries to carry that story to the present, which includes ongoing efforts to kind of protect wild rice to ensure the natural conditions, which is a work that's done by Indigenous communities. And it's a work that's done because in the unfortunate recent past of Wisconsin, we've created conditions that make it so wild rice isn't able to grow. So there is still some being grown, it's still being harvested, in traditional ways by Indigenous communities, but it's important that these advocacies are going, and it's important for us to use our position to highlight them a little bit, because that is such important work to change some of the wrongs of the past.
Well, it really sounds like people want to get out to the museum, especially this month, to really be able to take advantage of some of those engagement opportunities and to see what's at the museum that tells us about the people on whose land we live. Thank you both so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having us.
You can learn
Thank you.
more about Wisconsin's Native Nations on the Milwaukee Public Museum website at mpm.edu. Coming up, the ongoing fight over Wisconsin's election maps. We'll break it all down for you.